for a little bit to give a quick presentation. I hope that this will also be a very interactive section. So please do post questions in the Q&A box in Zoom, which hopefully, given we are now exactly 365 days into lockdowns, we all know roughly how to use. So please do sort of interact from there. So just to start, whoops, wrong button, there we go. And Sue, can you just confirm you're seeing my full screen?
Yep, I can see it. Thanks, Guy.
Great. So this is me. First of all, that's my contact detail. If you need to, please get in touch. Very open about all of this stuff. It's all about sharing.
I'm sorry, Guy, just to let you know, we're actually seeing your next slide as well. So we don't see the presentation in full screen.
I thought that might be the case. So let me stop that. And no, oh, I know, hang on.
I think we need to call Charisma.ai to sort it out.
Seriously, problems with humans. I think, no, it's doing it again, hang on.
Yep, that's it.
Is that for the full screen? Yeah, okay. So for those, you need to drag it to your second screen and then do it. So that's now the full screen, right?
It's perfect, yeah.
Okay.
We haven't got time to explain, we've got to move. Just talk to him, hear what he has to say, and we'll do the rest.
He's just fooling with you. Relax. Let me tell you a story.
So what I want to talk to a bit about today is a bit of an introduction to creative AI and storytelling. And again, please, this is from my perspective, and I'm sure I'm missing out many things, but I thought would be interesting. The interesting thing to me about this sort of overlap and the key to these stories is that they will be able to be generated by an AI, but also to be told in such a way that people will want to hear them. This will allow for an infinite amount of stories to be told in a multitude of ways, but only the best stories will survive. It's like the survival of the fittest, in that it's survival of the best story. The stories will be told in a variety of ways because the AI will be able to tell the story to the listener through a number of different mediums. If the AI is able to tell the story through a video game, it may choose to tell a story this way. If it can tell the story through a video, it may choose this medium. If it can tell the story through a book, it may choose this medium. If it can tell it through a blog, it may choose this medium. The AI will be able to choose the best medium and the best way of telling the story to tell the story. The AI will be able to use these different mediums to create a story that is not only a good story, but the best story it can tell. Now, straight away, interestingly, you might have noticed I was reading that. That's because that piece of text was generated by GPT-3 when I typed in the sentence, an introduction to creative AI and storytelling, and it created that, which having worked in this industry for too many years, was actually quite insightful in a lot of ways, and it was not a bad definition of transmedia. So straight away, what we're seeing is that, you know, the work that we do in across AI, which is a very broad field, but in that instance specifically in GPT-3, is filling in gaps, and it's creating new little opportunities and inspiration for creative thinking in some ways. Now, I'm sure you've seen where a lot of a lot of AI visually is at the moment. So, for example, this guy who is an anchor.
Hello, everyone. I'm an English artificial intelligence anchor. This is my very first day in Xinhua's agency. My voice and appearance are modeled on Zhang Zhao, a real anchor with Xinhua. The development of the media industry calls for continuous innovation and deep integration with
Guy, the audio from your recordings is a bit low. I don't know if it can be fixed, but you can continue.
He's got subtitles so you can see, but you know, I think there was almost the key bit of that was this guy who's reading his reading the news is saying he's going to work tirelessly for the news agency, which is both very admirable as an employee, but also slightly concerning for the rest of us who may actually tire out at the beginning. And I may touch on the concept of centaurs and reverse centaurs in AI, which I'm sure you've been familiar with. And now, if we have a slight issue with audio, then you might not be able to see this AI fake of Tom Cruise and Jeff Goldblum. You may have seen on a late night chat show. There's Robert Downey Jr., Ewan McGregor. And now, but the important thing about this is you've probably I'm assuming quite a high level of knowledge about AI on the call, is that this is not live, these deepfakes. They're well edited, they're well polished. There is an element of these of AI, but it is a collaborative enterprise. However, none of these are stories. And indeed, it's debatable if they're creative in that sense. What they are examples that went viral in a very small and very unique and contained area. Stories make things slightly more complicated, and we'll dive into that. Now, a couple of years ago, I did a fellowship in automation down at the Southwest Content Technology Network, SWCTN, and I found that one of the things that it dawned on me while I was doing this was that AI in some ways is the cause and automation is the effect. So as we're looking a lot, not only from a creative standpoint, but also a technology standpoint, a social standpoint, an ethical standpoint, all of these, and we're looking at AI, actually there's a significant piece that comes out of it, which is automation. And as we look at that automatic creativity, I thought I'd put down 3 sort of steps that I see as leading towards this automatic creativity and where some of the issues may lie. Firstly, my strong belief and our belief within everything that we do at Charisma is that we're building a tool to help creativity, not replace it. Now, as someone also who works, every day with publishers, TV producers, networks, everything, if I go into those organizations and I try and say, hey guys, got this great tool, we can create books automatically or create TV automatically, I don't think I'll be given a very good reception by anyone in that industry. So almost for me to survive as a business, we have to do this in a nice and collaborative way. To do this, to build the tool to help creativity and not replace it, the first thing is we need to understand how to tell a story. And this is one of my absolute bugbears, and Marion mentioned that I've set up a consortium of interested parties at the beginning of this year looking at collaborative AI, because what we felt was that, and indeed, by the way, one of the reasons why I set up Charisma was that big tech companies, so naming them Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, all of those companies, when they're building the sort of technologies that the creative industries are using, say Alexa, Siri, and so forth, Google Dialogflow, they are not building them for the creative industries. They're building them largely out of their own shape, out of their own industry, which for Google is a search engine, and an advertising company. For Amazon is a retail company. So they're always going to have that angle. And indeed, I argue quite often that what their angle is, the common thread that exists in that angle, is that they are getting the user in and out as fast as possible. Search engines, retail, they want to complete that action very quickly. Whereas in in the creative industries, in our industry, the goal is to keep people in the story for as long as possible, to engage people, to keep them interested. So we need to build stuff which is based on what we know and is suitable for purpose. And to do that, we've found the first step we did was to go back and query what a story is and how to tell a story. And there is an element of Marshall McLuhan here about looking at the different medium and how the message matches the medium. But ultimately, actually, we rolled back, we kept going back and back and back in time, which I'll talk to a bit. And we were going back pre-film, and then we were going back to the books, and then we were going back to pre-book, pre-printing press, and almost then before then, going back to the campfire, the oral tradition, the troubadours who would wander around telling stories. And I'll touch on that in a bit about why that was relevant. So we need to understand how to tell a story. We also are working in a visual medium, so we need to understand how to film a story. What are those conventions that have been so well established, well honed? The psychology of filming a story, how to use those visual techniques. And more than anything, we need to understand an audience's feelings. This was critical to when we started building Charisma, because we wanted to make sure that the audiences felt something. They felt empathy, they felt fear, they felt love, they felt sadness, happiness, all of these different elements. And to be able to tell a story in that way needs to resonate. So to build these tools, to build the technology of the future, we need to understand these concepts. And so with the introduction of AI, it has impacted in a couple of ways. And the ones I'll outline now are being impacted in greater and lesser extents, and we're seeing the impact in a variety of different ways. The first place where the walls have fallen with AI's stories. So there you go. There's the fourth wall. We're starting to see AI fill in the gaps between what is possible. I'll come to that in a minute. But more than that, it's about the length of the story itself. So if you imagine that you can imagine a poem and roughly what that size is, a book roughly what that size is, a TV series roughly a commercial 45 minutes per episode, a movie being roughly, I don't know, 110 minutes, something like that, a game longer, a few hours. But if we start to then apply AI into the process of storytelling, what we're starting to explore is how those stories might run for days, for weeks, for years. What does a 20-year story look like when the characters might grow with us, alongside us? And how do you factor in the story? And you will see I keep coming back to this. This is a story. It's not building a chatbot that's going to last 20 years. It's building a story with characters in that will last for this sort of length. So with the ability for AI, and especially things like GPT-3 to come in and start to look at new ways of creating content, one of the key barriers, the hurdles to this, was that it was going to be almost impossible for a writer to write this. But with these sorts of assisted writing, we're starting to see this become possible. Naturally, we start to look at backstory more. So backstory often is not really referenced that much in a film or in TV. It's one of those things that is written as part of the character exposition, but certainly for the projects that we've worked on, what is on screen is the now, and the backstory pops in every now and again, but is not critical. As we start to look into this world and our AI world, backstory becomes something which is very useful. And what we're starting to see is almost backstory becomes the prompt for GPT-3 and other technologies as a way to give a direction to the AI itself. And of course, naturally, we're seeing AI as inspiration for those stories, a bit like the intro to the talk that I gave, I gave earlier. So where this is happening right now, it's nice to look into the future, but of course, you've seen this in virtual production, and the last 12 months, I think, have had an enormous impact on the the acceptance of virtual production. There is still a significant layer in TV and film production about wanting it to be real and shot in a real environment. But the pandemic's changed that. And as we move now into this space, things get a lot more interesting, not least around asset reuse, simply. So where we started, for example, with Charisma this time last year, we were doing interactive comic books in our app, which we did for reasons around rolling back to the core of storytelling. And then we moved into video through the work we were doing with Sky. Over the course of the last year, we've evolved our work in Unity and Unreal to be able to take those assets from TV production, drop them into the engine as a very consistent backdrop to our interactive versions of TV drama. The other one, of course, is virtual distribution. We mustn't underestimate the impact of Netflix, HBO Max, and so forth as they hit the market. And specifically, the impact that we see on this is that it is a highly competitive market, a brutally competitive market. And as someone who's worked in pay TV before, every little differentiator you can possibly put into the mix to attract a new subscriber, to retain that subscriber, and then upsell them new tiers or programs or whatever it may be, is critical. And what I find fascinating about this, and have done for a long while, or really since the beginning of cable TV, is the bit that is underestimated in this, to me, is that it is a two-way mechanism. It's not just a one-way distribution out to the user, but the viewer sitting there on the sofa has the back channel, the return path, as we used to call it, that can go back up to the cloud and provide input from the viewer. And that could be anything from, as we've seen, the basic level of statistical analysis of what I'm viewing. That to me is not that interesting. What is interesting is where that starts to be user interaction in a TV show itself. And that could be either via text or via voice. And similarly with virtual consumption, where we might see it on laptop, we might see it on mobile, we might see it on TV. And again, I find it interesting that the TV itself is almost like this sleeping giant in our living rooms at the moment. We're used to interactions through consoles and through those devices that allow us to play high-end video games. But sitting there, in the corner or in the main area in our living rooms is this huge dominant screen into which people can distribute apps. And if you compare how many apps are on your standard TV at home with how many there are in the App Store at the moment, it's a really early market on TV. So let's look at what the next step is. The next step for me is fix the problems with the present. We've got a lot to do, and I'm sure everyone here is working on this as much as we are. There are a number of things we need to really think through. Firstly is an understanding of what GPT-3 is. It's mechanical. AI is mechanical. It does not have a soul. It is a way of doing things. However, as we're starting to see, this territory is becoming incredibly political, with not only OpenAI, when their investment from Microsoft, starting to look at an ethics umbrella which is coming from commerce, but then the other side of it, which is more the sort of open hacker community, I suppose, for want of a better word, which is putting up alternate pathways like Luther.ai, where you're seeing a lot more transparency of data sets, transparency of code, but there is less regulation in that sense. And somewhere in the middle of the governments who are, still got a long way to go to catch up. The other problem at the moment, of course, is that AI is technology driven, And this is why we set up our collaborative AI group, because we feel that the next direction of AI, especially when it is applied to the creative industries, but also when it becomes more of a social focus, it needs to have a direction which is better thought through. And I love the rise of philosophy as into the AI ethics space. You know, I minored in philosophy way back at uni, and in my last year at that university was the last year of the philosophy department. It shut down after that because there weren't that many people interested in philosophy. Now, thank God, it's coming back up again, because it is vital that we as creative people and philosophers can imagine what this might look like, as well as just create it. And, you know, I go back to the Jurassic Park quote from Jeff Goldblum: just because we could develop it doesn't mean that we should. We need to understand what it is that may happen as a result of this, and collaborate with it. Similarly, AI has an ethics problems. We all know that there are issues around this. I have a view that technology companies simply cannot have an ethics department within that technology company. It needs to come from outside, unless that ethics division can totally change the strategy of the company. And I think we've seen issues, we've seen the issues with Google, but there exist plenty around the rest of the technology industry, where it's great to have an ethics team, applaud the concept of it, but unless that ethics team can change what the company is doing, then I argue that it's a toothless tiger, and we need to have a different approach to it, which needs to come from outside that organization. And then equally, we need to look at the climate crisis. It's just, I've thought about, long and hard about putting this one on, but I think as we start to move into a more positive, sunshiny space, just as the sun starts to come out behind me here, and we're starting to hopefully see a way out of the pandemic, we need to think very hard about the climate crisis, and indeed what AI can do to solve that. And my sense about it is that this is now almost like the coming together of everything I've just talked about imagination, about creative industries, and about technology and AI that allows it to scale. How can we bring this together to make it make sense? So what's in it for you? Well, hopefully a lot of you are already working in it, so I shouldn't need to sell it through. But for me, this is the most exciting, creative, innovative, existential, challenging, evolutionary, revolutionary, mind-boggling time in history ever. That's not a bad time. And in fact, somebody was asking me the other day, if you were to go back in time, what period would you like to live in? I said, that's a really hard question, because right now is so, it's such an incredible time to be alive and have all of these different challenges and opportunities for us as we go through. However, it is also an existential moment. So what next must we do? As Tolstoy said, well, if I look back from our perspective, and I can't give too much of a worldview other than what we've done over the last year, we made a sort of big play with Charisma, which is, I suppose, our fundamental difference, which is that we place the audience within the story. So this is the app, our comic book app. You are part of the story. You're not pressing left or right in a Bandersnatch way, or sort of or choosing yes, no as a button outside of the story, but notionally controlling it. You're inside it, and it's the natural language processing that allows us to have that conversation with characters that feels free. So that's number one. Number two is that characters are the narrative, and the way that we tend to define stories is that we look at them from three different pillars. One is the characters. The second is the narrative, which is what happens to the characters. And the third is the story world, which is where all of the previous two happen. From our perspective, our focus and our strength is around characters and bringing those characters to life. And the reason for that is because the internet is a communications medium. And so naturally, again, sort of in a slightly McLuhan-esque way, I can say that our sort of creative work matches the medium in which we operate, which is about communication. And we are we're starting to really explore not only the narratives and the characters and how we bring those two together, but also the psychology of characters and of conversation. What we discovered very early on, as we brought these characters to life, is that conversation in some ways is a game, you know, and our game is conversation. The two you know, balance each other. And what I mean by that is that if you think about certain set scenarios that exist, let's take it, for example, like a police interrogation, it's a game. It's a game between one person who's trying to get information out of the other one and the other one who's trying not to give it. And there are certain techniques and psychologies that are used in that game to make, you know, the chance of you being a winner the better. Similarly, in a job interview, or if you're going and asking for a pay rise, there are certain things you do say and certain things you don't say. And ultimately, winning is getting to the point where you want to get to, if it's the pay rise or getting the job. So we found that the psychology, bringing that psychology into our narratives, into our characters, was very interesting. I would say that the app that we did, and please do have a look at it, and create your own stories in Charisma and publish them into the app, which is what you can do. Our approach to that was really as a bit of a sandbox. You know, we started off adapting long form 50-page graphic novels, and we chose graphic novels for two reasons. One, because they're illustrated and we were going into a visual medium, so that matches. And secondly, because graphic novels are almost totally dialogue, and we are in a conversational dialogue medium, so that it matched nicely. But what you should see, what you should look at that app as is really one of our stepping stones. So for us, as I said at the beginning, it was about rolling back, thinking about storytelling, stripping everything back to what makes a good interactive story when you are casting the audience inside that story. From there, we can start to layer on richer, more three-dimensional and animated, in its broadest sense of the word, worlds. So even over the last year, as I mentioned before, we've gone from an app, a two-dimensional app, which is largely static images. There's some basic, almost like parallax animation in there, through video, through interactive video with Sky, up into a space where we've been exploring through the Digital Catapult program around how scenarios feel in an Unreal Engine environment, where you walk into a room and there are multiple people and characters in that room. What does that feel like? And if you imagine this in from your own experiences, it might be walking into a meeting that's already underway, or more interestingly, a party. And as you walk in through that door and you see everyone already chatting, that moment is what we're trying to recreate. What psychology do you feel at that moment? You're feeling, oh, look, hey, there's someone I know, there are people I don't know. Oh, look, someone's beckoning me over to ask a question. And if that conversation and the question happened to be something contentious, that is saying, let's say it's married to Marion, and Marion is walking in, and the two people are saying, Marion, we're just having this huge debate about this topic, and I think it's this, and my friend thinks it's that. What do you think? Now, instantly, Marion's answer on this is going to put him either pro or against one of those characters, and that will then change the nature of the rest of the evening and the relationship that goes on from there. So that sort of relationship management is what Charisma does, and how we pulled it from there. And finally on this is that we stand on the shoulders of giants, going back through those troubadours, which we do research. We do look to understand how those stories were created, told, and what happened in history as those stories started to be written down, not least by the Grimm brothers, who were taking stories that were used to being told around campfires or in towns and villages around Europe, and then locked into a medium. You know, they were locked, whereas previously they weren't necessarily locked. And you saw, you might see the troubadour who would stay the night at the local inn, pick up the gossip, pick up the mayor's name, pick up who all the gossip that they could get from the bars, and then work those into the story that they would tell the next day. And that's very much our space as well, which is that we work your as a viewer, as a participant, we work your character into the story. You know, on a basic level, it's your name, but also it may be what you've said previously to one of the characters. It may be how you made a character feel. It may be the weather. It may be the football scores. All of those things we can bring into Charisma and put them into the mix and use them to sort of hyper-personalize the stories it comes through. And then really, you know, the final piece for us is that creativity should define creative AI. It's vital that, that, as I said, the creative industries are pivotal players in this next step. And my sense is that we are at a moment this year and probably next year where that decision may be made or may not be made. But it will fundamentally change the way in which the creative industries evolves as to whether it takes it up or not. So that really is where I will leave it as my final piece. This is where we are. Please let me open it to questions and answers, and maybe Marion, you and I can carry on the conversation anyway, because I know the moment we start talking, you know, time will fly by. But thank you very much for listening so far, and I hope it stimulated some thoughts.
Thank you very much, Guy. It's been a great presentation, kind of trying to summarize a very large field into 30 minutes is not easy, but you've done a great job. I have quite a few questions myself, but I think I will just follow the conversations in Q&A and in the chat box, and allow our audiences to interject their thoughts. So from Isabel, the question is, what do you think are the implications for conventional cinema in light of these emerging tools that offer greater levels of personalization?
Thank you, Isabel. Yeah, so the other thing I haven't mentioned, but this inspires the answer, is about physical venues. So I'm going to bundle together cinema and theatre and then address them slightly differently. Gosh, I mean, you know, going back decades, we've had attempts at personalizing cinema experiences, whether it's through, you know, smell-o-vision or putting, you know, objects around someone's seat or whatever it might be. Again, I think there is an interesting impact that the pandemic's had on both cinemas and theatres. I've no doubt that cinema will come back in some way, shape or form. But as we go through, I think, I don't know, you know, the more I think about it as well, I think that what we found with TV, let me take the question in this angle, is I've always been slightly skeptical of the second screen experience, where I'm watching a TV show and then I'm somehow also finding out about the characters, or, you know, doing something else that's detracting me from that same that screen while the show is on. So I get the sense that, in a funny sort of way, I think it is likely that cinema will retain the medium predominantly. There is no need to replace the cinema as the medium in that sense. Where I do think it'll go is that the conventional movies or films, as they are created, will have wider reuse. So you may have, let's call it a cut for cinema, a cut for the TV screen, and then increasing reuse and recycling of those assets for other medium as well. So what we might find is that the cinema offers a particular experience which it is good at, and it will retain that. And then, but we will see the movies told in different ways. Theatre is fascinating, and I think the impact on theatre is a lot more significant for a number of key reasons. One, the theatre ecosystem is a lot more fragile than cinema. Cinema has a lot more money in it than theatre does, and also it has been chronically hit by the pandemic. And I know this, again, as Marion said, I'm chair of the old fire station here in Oxford, but also we collaborated with Big Telly over in Northern Ireland and Creation Theatre in Oxford to produce a version of Alice in Wonderland at the beginning of lockdown, which involved Charisma.ai. It involved real-time mobile-based 3D gaming with the hedgehog game at the end of the croquet game at the end of Alice in Wonderland. It was all live actors. It's incredibly ambitious, and really innovated more than any other piece of interactive theatre that I've seen, to be honest. In that it properly changed the story itself. So and there is we published a book about that, a sort of handbook, which you can get off for free off the Charisma.ai website in the blog section when I was writing about it. So my sense is that people are going to be slower to go back to theatres. Maybe it's just a slightly older demographic more broadly, and they will be concerned about the pandemic. But also, as I said, it's more fragile, and it is more innovative. So
Guy,
I don't think it is.
I'm sorry to come in, but there are other questions coming. So if you could bring that to an end.
I'll bring that close. Very good.
Yes,
okay,
yes.
Thank you. So there you go. So Tom, integrated music AI with storytelling. Have you? We're just starting to, Tom. Yes. So we did with the but not AI generated, actually. So in the app, we scored the adaptation of the comic books uniquely. It's a unique bespoke score where different elements of it come in and out and weave in and out at different parts of the story, depending on what the user's done. So it is interactive. We are talking to a number of AI musicians about how that works and how it may play out. Again, I go back to the same answer that I said before, which is AI cannot create Bach, much as people say it can. Bach creates Bach. Rembrandt is a Rembrandt and will always be the same. So my sense is this is something we are certainly exploring, and it's a fascinating area, and we will certainly be pushing down that pathway in the next year, because it's part of the mix. It's part of the visual mix.
I have a question that came from the chat box. I'm just going to read it to you, Guy. So you could relax. I'll deliver the questions to you, and you could just focus on answers. Our Jen Chubb says, thank you for the talk. Really fantastic area. Her own work concerns the future of AI. She's a philosopher by trade, and she really is very pleased to see that you're highlighting the importance of ethics in the creative industries, and you've done that in your talk. And she's asking whether you could tell us a bit more about what you think is needed with respect to creative AI for storytelling and ethics.
Yeah, and Jen, do connect up to this on it. Let me give you one example, which we have put in every project that we can over the last 10 years, which is that difficult conversations should be handled. And when you start on that, you need to run it through. And specifically, what I'm talking about is try this when if you've got Alexa or Siri, if you try talking about suicidal thoughts or saying you're going to go and kill someone, something of that sort of life-changing significance, conversational AI should handle that. And it's about conversation design. It's not the AI. It needs to handle that. So, and it needs to handle it, because if you are in that moment of life-changing decision-making in your own life, and the answer comes back, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you just said, please try a different way, that's not a good way to handle it. So we do need to bring those into that. We do need to think about it. And it's what I was suggesting before, which is that this is a field where the creative industry is very strong, is very good. And I mean, we put it in everything, and we need to think, in fact, not only about that, but in a few years ago, we wrote a paper on unconscious bias in AI data sets before it was a sort of too big a deal for people to talk about, because we recognized it was going to be important for our own roles. And I think people, you know, there is an approach maybe driven by the allure of bright, shiny technology, maybe driven by venture capital, just to go out and grab stuff, whether it's, you know, feeding AI off Twitter or Reddit without thinking. And we just need to, it's not going to slow anything down, but it's just going to, you're just going to have that thought and sort of ethical strategy.
Thank you. Jen has promised or threatened to contact you separately after this. So
I did offer.
And a question from Mohammed, and I'll try to unpack it a bit. It textually says, does the storytelling AI change the ending of a game? And he's explaining that is the journey in the game predefined using AI, or does the story change interactively? I presume he means the plot and the dialogues. I think maybe that's the separation.
So the short answer, Mohammed, is it's up to the author. If the author wants to have multiple endings, then you know, go for it. And if you want to have a single ending, that's also fine. I think the layer that sits behind this is that if you are making an interactive story, you need to properly show to the viewer or the participant what their impact has been. And that's why people have multiple endings. So they can go, oh, because you did this, you've now got this different ending. Our view is that you need to show that throughout the entire story, not just at the ending. So you'll see in the app, again, we hit sort of little end of chapter moments, and we just highlight where the impacts have come in, and to a greater or lesser degree. So I think it is, we did that in the app because we felt that it was very important to really, you know, bang the gong, go, hey, you've had an impact, you've had another impact, because it's a new medium and people aren't yet tuned to the nuances of how they've changed someone from being happy to sad. They just think maybe that character is always happy and it didn't matter that it could be sad. So I think there's a lot of signposting that is needed right now to audiences to you know, reinforce that and that impact that they've had on the story. You know, so I'd argue, but it's up to the author to filter that into their stories.
There's another question from Claire asking whether the conversational AI is learning from each conversation it has with the audience, and if yes, how?
So ours does not, very deliberately, and the reason is because the moment we start to talk to significant, you know, Hollywood studios, whoever it may be, there's no way that they would ever have dialogue or script automatically generated. And I think Microsoft's Tay is probably the biggest sort of anti-argument for learning. And indeed, as we come to look to something like GPT-3, where you might have, as I said, elements of the dialogue automatically generated, I should really qualify that and say semi-automatically, because there is always, especially for big IP owners, let's say it's J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter, you would never have a line of dialogue that has been automatic. You just wouldn't get away with it. It wouldn't be approved and everything. So our view is that we straddle the line between AI and then putting a bit back to the authors. In the authors, you can see in the system, you can see what people have said. you know, so you can see what the answers are and how people have responded. And as an author, you can then choose how to then improve the story as a result.
From Sondes, we have a follow-up question, who herself is an AI researcher, so she's got a strong AI background, and she's asking, how can we analyze the outcomes of AI in the creative industries? How do we evaluate the quality? And she's asking, should the focus be only on audiences?
It is a very good question. We have a principle that every project we do has 3 KPIs, 3 key performance indicators on it. And we do it from the start of every project because it helps guide the direction of the project and everyone to stay on track with what they are, with the focus of that particular project. With your question about should the focus only be on the audience, if one of the KPIs is audience reaction, then yes, absolutely. But it may be that different projects would have a different outcome or a different KPI for that. You know, there is of course the old sort of almost Hollywood thing, you know, make them laugh, make them cry. Well, there are 2 KPIs. If we can make people laugh, make people cry, and that's success, then we've done it. Then we've produced a good project. I think probably if you, I'm really tempted to bite the bait on this and say yes. I think the audience is. I think ultimately the focus is on the audiences, but maybe as we start to look at you know, we sometimes say the way I sometimes describe charisma is that I'm sure Marion does this as well. But you have, you know, if you're writing a book, you use Microsoft Word. If you're writing a film script, you use Final Draft. If you're writing an interactive story, you use Charisma. Now, on that principle, success is that a writer can easily create the stories they want to write. So I think we look at the at success from a couple of ways, but ultimately, I think for our success, our company success, if we have a runaway audience-based you know, success, that's going to be the main one.
I think I have space for a question of my own. So, oh no, I think Sondes, let me see, I'm thinking about the worker, the creative mind. My vision was always that AI is another element in the toolbox.
And you know what, we often talk about charisma being a toolkit, a tool very much in that space. And the analogy I use more than that, even more, is that it's a paintbrush. And the reason I quite like it, or it's a palette, it's a color in the color palette. And the reason I like that is because painting requires a discipline of which color to use in which circumstance. If you use all the colors, you end up with a gray and it doesn't come out. And so the implication of that is to use the right tool for the right moment. And a bit like the way that GPT-3 created at the beginning, you know, as a story, if a story is most appropriate, if an element of a story is most appropriately told through video on YouTube, you do it on YouTube. If it's most appropriate to be told via an SMS text message, you use that. But it's a tool to achieve a certain end. And that always is what a tool is for. You use a spanner for a particular type of nut.
And that's a great cue into my question. Looking at charisma as a toolkit, what's your experience of people using it? Do you still need technologists to, I don't know, allow a deeper use of the tool? Is it entirely usable by novices, and so on and so forth?
It's really interesting. Our view is that it's very much up to the author's mind. It's not a tech. We do not need tech people. We do not need tech skills. What I think our fundamental starting point, why it's different, is that it's about casting the audience into the story, and that's new, and that's the creative challenge. It's not a technical one. It's about the author positioning themselves in the story as they tell that story and working it from there. And that ultimately is what we all do, right, with immersive storytelling. You know, if you're not immersed in the story, then you know, you're just watching 360 video or something. I mean, it's non-interactive. So we've gone to great pains and run writers' labs and, you know, put the word out and got writer feedback, and we still do hugely, to refine Charisma as a way to write, not a way to. You don't need the technical skills to do it. If you're going to go into Unreal and Unity, well, of course, you're then going to need, you're probably going to need to partner with someone who can do that side. But for us, it's all about the story and about how to, you know, I often feel that, you know, part of the reason we created Charisma, because I was writing interactive stories, and I was trying to use IBM Watson, and we broke it. I mean, it was just not fit for purpose in any way, shape, or form. And that was really that aha moment that realized, one, we needed to build something that was fit for purpose for the creative industries, but two, that the technology companies were not that interested in entertainment. They wanted to go into, you know, call centers and stuff.
And maybe before we have a virtual hug and say goodbye, where do you see Charisma.ai in 5 years from now?
Well, I sort of said at the beginning, which is, you know, in the video, that I think our version is that it is like the final draft. It's the de facto platform that a lot of people use for these sorts of elements. I think we are researching new forms of storytelling enormously, and you know what? Whenever it happens, I'm really looking forward to the moment of experiencing a story in Charisma that takes me fully by surprise, that someone has created, and I've gone, oh my God, I never thought about it like that. And in that essence, I suppose it's like a child. I want to see that child flourish and grow. And the best form of flattery we can have is that they go off without us,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
And if someone's
Indeed.
created a brilliant project in Charisma, yeah, and used it in a way that you haven't necessarily thought, man, I'm happy.
On that note, thank you very much, Guy. It's been inspiring and very entertaining. Thank you to everybody for having listened and taken part. And I hope we'll see you hopefully in person in DC Labs in the near future.
Very much hope so. We really look
Thanks
forward
very
to it.
much. Thanks everybody.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye-bye. Bye.